you very much for having me. I should have asked this question when you opened it up for questions, but I actually have a mix of poetry and fiction. I hope that's okay. Okay.
That is absolutely, you read whatever you got. You
Okay.
got 15 to 20 minutes to read what you like, Tori.
Okay. So I thought I would read a couple poems and then a couple of excerpts from the novel. The one theme that kind of continues between the two is the idea of memory and what makes memory and how you preserve memories. The chapbook, Vaginas Need Air, is essentially my version of my mother. So when my mother passed away and my sister and brother and I were preparing for her celebration of life and sharing stories, of course, I realized that all three of us had different versions of our mother. I was the oldest, and so this chapbook is kind of my memories of her, my version of her. And I will read the poem that gave the chapbook its title, which is called Bath Night. Mother helps us wrap our hair in towels like queens of Sheba. She strides the shag carpet in her pink curls and drifting cigarette. Towels belong in the bathroom or down the laundry chute. We half dry. The clean scent of softener on our pajamas, flouncy baby dolls with elastic leg ruffles, some slinky newfangled fabric. We tip over in a pile of girl with our damp skin, legs and downy arms, long necks with our hair pulled up. Mother hands us hairbrushes, watching us pull at our scalps. Father, outnumbered, works late. I know the patterns of both my sister's tan lines, their nipples neat as coins. Our mother reads us one eye, two eyes, and three eyes. Two eyes is supposed to be the heroine, but three eyes uncovers the truth. Only two eyes close. The third eye is curious. Vaginas need air, says mother, switching off the light. We kick off our pajama bottoms, feel the night air between our legs. She kisses us goodnight, glancing kisses with her dry lips. Mother smells of viceroy and dippity-doo. We imagine the ecosystem of our private parts, part eye, part channel to a hidden chamber. Thank you. And now I'm going to switch to the book. So the plot of this novel is the main character, Rourke, who is called the Fergus, lost his gran, and he's very much missing her. And he has a difficult relationship with a overly stern father. And one morning he wakes up and he can hear voices of the dead, and the voices lead him to a grove where he meets a banshee who leads him on a quest in a land called Shufti that's in between life and death. So I'm going to read a section from the beginning, and I'm just going to drop you into the scene. I think you know enough now to get at least a sense. Rourke's father was perennially stoic, never showing emotion of any kind, which made Rourke even more self-conscious, embarrassed even at just how much he missed his gran. Her absence was a daily punch to the solar plexus. He could hardly breathe. He felt like the shell of a person. Worse, thoughts of regret nagged at him. Why hadn't he noticed how sick she was? Why hadn't he made himself more useful to her? She'd tried to prepare him at the end, and he'd been oblivious. In his own world, as his father said. He'd wondered too what her last mysterious words had meant. Find a way to connect. Find a way to connect with others? Connect with his heritage? What had she meant? And who was she talking to at the end? He wished he could ask his father, but the risk of scorn was too high, and he didn't know how he'd find the words. He wished he could go back, do over, reprogram his last moments with his gran, so she could tell him. Pathetic. Angus, he whistled. The dog, a West Highland Terrier with curious dark button eyes, permanently alert ears, skidded around a corner. Rourke looped the leash around the dog's neck, and he and Angus stepped out into the street. The village was hushed and quiet. The milk truck was still making its rounds, stopping and starting with that queer hum between the neighborhood's terraced houses. Rourke squinted into bright sunlight, his head scudding with the racket made by the voices, and turned away from the village, heading for the outer boundary where the road dead ended. The colors in the sky hadn't resolved themselves yet and were trapped in splotches of pink, purple, and mauve above a rim of trees, but the air was bracing and a little breezy and carried with it, as always, a salty hint of the sea. Rourke stepped over the barricade and walked the castle farm path, his spirits lifted momentarily by the sudden change in landscape. 1 minute he walked along the stone dike bordering the sleepy village. The next he was in open fields and farm pasture. The only problem was he had to walk past the cemetery and Morag, the crazy one's gatehouse at the turn in the lane. He kept his din-racked head down, hoping to avoid contact with her, but of course she was in the front garden talking to herself while she tended to her marsh orchids and ragwort, her hair ethereal and white against the morning's low clouds. She usually wore her hair in a knot at the nape of her neck, but today it flowed past her shoulders in a floating curtain of hair. "Aye, aye, Rourke the Fergus," she said, eyeing him with rheumy eyes. "Aye, aye, Morag." Ferguson was his surname, and the Fergus was a pet name his gran had given him. It meant something in Gaelic, but he'd forgot. Morag and his gran had been great friends, though Rourke could never figure out why. His gran would visit Morag at her cottage as the sun set on May Eve or Lammas, streaking the sky with confectionery light. She'd come home strange, touched almost, musing about her husband or mother, when Rourke would bring her her nightly hot water bottle, as if Morag had somehow peeled back time. Angus resisted the tug on his leash, interested as he was in rooting around and lifting his leg on every weed and tuft of grass, so Rourke was forced to stand there, awkward and flustered, as Morag stood in the jungle of her garden, her arms akimbo and looking to the woods in the distance. As she turned toward him, Rourke could hear her sing-song voice muttering a song, a chant, or some other incantation. There was something vaguely familiar about the lilting melody. Angus coiled the leash around Rourke's feet, and Rourke had to stoop to untangle himself. Morag bobbed her head in his direction, a scowl between her eyes as she watched his face for some kind of reaction, but Rourke didn't know what exactly to make of her nattering, and frankly, the less he knew about the inner workings of Morag's mind, the better. Most adults he knew were superstitious, so he thought the ditty or chant might just be a sign of that. His gran would box his ears for leaving his shoes on the table. Bad luck, she'd say. His father, too, when he was home, was forever tossing salt over his shoulder. But then Rourke stopped thinking. The wailing in his head grew louder, filling his skull. What was happening, he wondered, shaking his head. Then a strange shaft of light opened behind his eyes, like a rip in a fabric, and he heard a distinct voice calling him. He looked at Morag, who was looking at him in a funny way. "Did you say something?" he asked. She looked at him like he was a ghost or something. "No, Looney," she said. "It wasn't me." And I'll stop there. And then I'll go back to Vaginas Need Air. I don't normally read this particular poem because it's kind of long, but I'm thinking after prose, it might feel short. It's called Goulash. 1. Mother dog ears the pages, recipes with worldly names like stroganoff, cassoulet, ragout, in between housewifely articles about how to clean grout, the perfect smile, and the problem with no name. Slick photos, dangerous game. Father doesn't like his food touching. 2. Mother has a way of cocking her hip at the stove. 3. I'm roused from my reading to set the table. The flutter of blue tablecloth against a wallpaper of tropical birds, low-hanging candelabra curio cabinet with the good china and silver. Dinner is mother's insistence, despite how late father gets home. 4. We have our places at the table, mother and father at each end, me and sister's little brother arranged around the country French edge. Father stares at the casserole dish in the center of the table, bubbling and bloody. The eerie translucence of cooked cabbage. What's this, he asks. That thing with his jaw when he's angry, even into the light of the window behind him. Goulash, says mother, lighting a cigarette, staring back in a standoff only they know the meaning of. 5. Father divines with a serving spoon, parting the ways of cabbage, ground beef, and tomato sauce, distaste set in his lips. 6. The spoon in slow motion, the spoon in a flash, catapult of casserole onto mother, who doesn't flinch at first. We hear the fancy clock, tick, tock, hand nudging incrementally while we're all afraid to move or laugh or anything. 7. The wideness of our eyes, sitting on our hands. Mother slowly reaches, retaliating with the spoon. Father splattered with casserole. He throws down a napkin, unable to speak past his clenched teeth. The squeegee sound of the station wagon in reverse. 8. Mother eats a small portion of casserole. We feel for each other's feet beneath the table, trying not to look at each other. Clumps of casserole cling to mother, the tablecloth, and the wall like scratched scabs. We have no ideas about appropriateness or response. 9. We are excused from the table. 10. Mother clears, taking her time on the back stoop, shaking out the tablecloth, watching the purple martins streak and swoop in the dusking sky, searching for bugs. 11. Mother doesn't have to search for father. She knows where he is. They sashay home after bedtime, following each other's headlights. 12. Meal planning takes a turn, alternating nights of food that doesn't touch with food that does. Thank you. And then another passage from the Fergus. I forgot to mention that the book takes place in the Highlands of Scotland, which I think maybe you probably figured that out. And Rourke is teamed up with a girl called Deirdre as he journeys through this land of Shufti, half life, half death. And so this is later in the book when he and Deirdre are together journeying. Deirdre has an accident and he remedies the accident as best he can. And this title is called, or this chapter I should say, is called Replenishing. Rourke and Deirdre return to the path, walking single file, Deirdre setting the pace. The landscape of the Lochs was open and strangely serene, dotted with Lochside trees and shrubbery. He would never get used to the perpetually overcast sky of Shufti. It was downright unnerving how the two of them stood out in full color, their outlines sharp against the gray background, Deirdre especially, punctuated with color, headband, eyelashes, nails, scarf. After the dankness of the cave, the contrast was a lot for his eyes to take in. The plan was simple, but not simple, and as usual, Rourke was ravenously hungry. Why did his hunger dominate his thoughts so much, especially in Shufti? He gave Deirdre side glances, but she seemed unperturbed, calm even. He wondered how she was faring with her new memories, but was afraid to ask. Now that there was something between them, Conversation seemed riskier, more constrained. Rourke wondered at the contradiction. He worried about the flash drive in his pocket and wished desperately he had the sixpence. After and complicating matters, he wasn't convinced they could take the supplies they needed without a confrontation with the other team. Rourke picked up his pace. He did not like confrontation. Don't worry, said Deirdre, a furrow across her brow. We'll figure it out. How? Rourke asked. Another side glance. Wait a minute. He thought he saw something new and different about Deirdre, a marking of some kind. He caught a glimpse of it as she swung her arms, straining her camp shirt, but then it was gone, vanishing up her sleeve. They are a volatile team, said Deirdre. You will find their weakness, vulnerability. They will give us an opportunity. Rourke's stomach growled in response. Would you like me to forage for something? No, thanks, said Rourke, but I sure wish I had some of your trail mix. She looked at him quizzically. Trail mix, he prompted. Your very own recipe? I have a recipe for trail mix, she wondered. In my mind, I can see hands stirring ingredients together, a smudged note card, but the memory doesn't seem to belong to me. They slowed, Rourke not wanting to stir up anything more. The fact that she was who she was, but was still disjointed somehow, disconcerted him. Perhaps the memory typing had jostled her memories. Do you suppose, asked Deirdre, that remembering might be as simple as claiming what is meaningful to you? She was obviously thinking about her experience. Rourke would like to claim the sixpence. He cleared his throat, thinking he should tell her about the memory typing. It was one thing confiding in the banshee, but he wasn't sure how Deirdre would react. Would she be grateful or resentful? He did not want to slow her recovery. I don't think memory is the finite thing we think it is, he said. I remember stories my grand told me as if they were my own memories. The few stories I have from my father, too. Do you think sharing memories is a way for us to connect? Aye, she answered, memories are the foundation for every emotion. As young bairns, we have to remember faces we can trust. Was his a face she could trust? Rourke remembered the wood sorrel woman. Deirdre, he began. She asked. Rourke couldn't tell her, not yet. His stomach rumbled again, and he thought of the many recipes of his grand saved on the flash drive. You can see how to make the trail mix, right? On the note card, in the memory that doesn't exactly belong to you? Deirdre laughed spontaneously. You really are a gannet, she said. Rourke smiled to himself. Deirdre would come around. He was convinced of it. And that's all I have. I think I'm good for time, right? Thank you very much for having me and letting me share.
Thank you, Tori. That was